Oh, getting an alert here. Okay, now we're recording. So I'm the chair of the Transportation Committee, and as many of you who've been longtime members of the Zoning and Planning Committee remember, about 16 years ago, Mary Myers, who unfortunately is no longer with us, brought to the ZAP Committee this really difficult situation that we have in Denver, where every property owner is expected to pay for repairs and installation of the sidewalk in front of their own property. And that can be really hard for somebody who has and probably has had for a long time repairs that need to be done, who might be stuck with a really big bill that they may not be able to pay because the city says, well, that's up to you. And so ZAP proposed to the delegation, and the delegation approved a position that said we should have. Whoa.
Sorry, Joel, I accidentally muted you. I was trying to mute somebody else. The list was switching around. I apologize.
Okay. What did you miss here? Just a moment.
Yeah, just a minute there.
Okay. This position that INC took was later rolled into our transportation platform that was approved unanimously by the delegation in 2015. And you can find that on the INC website. The first three items in the walkability section of INC's platform, acknowledges that the pedestrian network, which right now is in terrible condition in Denver, is fundamental to making everything work, including transit and biking. We should adopt measures to preserve and complete the network. And we should replace the current policy that makes every individual homeowner responsible for installing and repairing sidewalks with alternate funding that leverages the city's negotiating power to get the best value. So this has been a long time position of INC. Many members of the INC Transportation Committee also serve on other groups that have been active in working on advocacy on transportation. And with the leadership of Denver Streets Partnership, that Jill Locantore is the executive director of, have developed a ballot proposal to ask the voters, should we be charged a small fee and the city takes responsibility for sidewalks? And Jill will be going over that now. This was presented earlier this month to the INC Transportation Committee, and Michael Henry made a motion that was unanimously supported by the committee to forward to the delegates that proposal that INC support this initiative and strongly encourage all RNOs to get their neighborhoods involved in getting this onto the ballot. It should be up to the voters to see if we can do what many other cities can do, like Inglewood, where just like our streets, the city takes care of the sidewalks as basic infrastructure. I'd now like to hand this over to Jill Locantore, Executive Director of Denver Streets Partnership, who go through in detail the proposal. Jill?
Thank you, Joel, and good morning, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here. So as Joel mentioned, INC has been working on sidewalks for a really long time, and we are just continuing to build on that work as Walk Denver and Denver Streets Partnership. We've been working on sidewalks for 7 years. And in the development of the proposed ballot initiative, we worked very closely with our coalition partners, including representatives from neighborhoods across the city, several of whom are on the call today, allied organizations like Colorado Cross Disability Coalition. We have Jamie Lewis here today from CCDC, Healthier Colorado, business districts, environmental groups, and we also consulted with experts in transportation finance, and local ordinances to make sure we were developing a really sound proposal. So the Denver Deserves Sidewalks program would fund the construction and repair of sidewalks citywide. And as Joel mentioned, this is a shift away from the policy that's been in place for decades of leaving it entirely up to the adjacent private property owner to build the sidewalk in the first place and to maintain the sidewalks in a state of good repair. And instead shifting to publicly funding sidewalks, just like we publicly fund other basic infrastructure, which we believe will make our city more equitable and fair and safe for everybody. If any of you have tried walking in your neighborhoods, you have likely encountered all of the problems with our sidewalks that makes it difficult to get around, from missing sidewalks, sidewalks that are too skinny for a person in a wheelchair or for a parent with a stroller, or even two people walking side by side, or sidewalks that are just in serious disrepair and present a serious tripping hazard or a challenge for people with mobility issues. A full 40% of Denver streets have sidewalks that are missing or too skinny, and an unknown number of sidewalks are in serious disrepair. This is particularly true in low-income neighborhoods. They are the least likely to have safe, well-maintained sidewalks. And again, as Joel mentioned, the current policies that essentially force adjacent property owners to shoulder the full cost of building sidewalks and repairing them can be a huge financial burden, thousands of dollars simply to repair the sidewalk adjacent to your home. So the Denver Deserves Sidewalks ballot initiative would remove that responsibility from the adjacent private property owner for repairing the sidewalks and place that squarely on the city. It would fund both the construction and the repair of sidewalks citywide throughout the entire city through a modest annual fee that's charged to property owners, which would enable the construction of our complete sidewalk network that serves every Denver neighborhood within 9 years of the ballot initiative passing, compared to the current funding levels, which would require 400 years before we would get a complete sidewalk network. And this initiative would provide sustained ongoing funding in perpetuity to maintain our sidewalks in a good state of repair, on the assumption that every sidewalk in Denver would need to be replaced about every 75 years. Sidewalks are a very good investment. They last longer than asphalt and other types of infrastructure, but they do start to deteriorate over time and do need ongoing repairs. In addition to making it easier for people with disabilities and low-income households to get around, sidewalks are directly related to a lot of different goals that our cities have, including providing safe routes to school. I talk to a lot of parents who would love to be able to let their kids walk or bike to school, but they don't feel safe doing so because there's a lack of good sidewalks between their home and their school. We know the lack of good sidewalks is part of our traffic safety problem. People walking in Denver are 30 times more likely to die in a crash. And a lot of the streets on our high injury network have missing or substandard sidewalks. Sidewalks are also essential for connecting people to transit. We all have seen so many of our bus stops in Denver are just a stick in the mud with no sidewalk connecting to or from it, and that deters a lot of people from using transit. We also know that driving is one of the major contributors to our greenhouse gas emissions problems and our air quality problems. And we know that you can't walk for every single trip, but a pretty substantial number of trips that people make every day are a mile or less. And again, I hear from people who say they would love to be able to walk to their neighborhood park or coffee shop, but they don't feel safe. They don't have an adequate sidewalk that lets them do that. So I'm sure you're all very curious about the details of the fee. This is based on the property frontage. So basically how wide the property is and the type of street that the property is located on. So Blueprint Denver, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, Denver's overarching plan for land use and transportation, it designates different street types throughout the city that's based on not just how many people do we anticipate traveling down those streets, but what are the adjacent land uses? Is it a quiet residential street? Is it a mixed use area? Is it downtown? And in turn, Denver's Complete Streets Design Guidelines identifies what the preferred sidewalk width is for each of those contexts. In a quiet residential area, you might not expect to see huge volumes of people walking, and there the preferred sidewalk width is 6 feet, whereas in downtown Denver, we all know there's an enormous number of people walking around, so the preferred sidewalk width there is 12 feet wide. So the fee is basically tied to the square footage of of concrete that would be required to build an ideal sidewalk in front of that property based on the width of the property and the type of street that it's on. The most prominent or common case would be a single family home on a local residential street. In that case, the fee would be $2.15 per linear foot. A typical single family home lot in Denver is about 50 feet wide. So you do the math and that works out to an annual fee of just around $100 or about $9 per month. We did want to be really thoughtful about equity and equitable distribution of the costs associated with this program. And so we put a lot of thought into different ways of doing that. And we consulted with Denver's Office of Economic Development and Opportunity. And we landed on this approach of offering a 20% discount in Denver's NEST neighborhoods. That stands for Neighborhood Equity and Stabilization Program, that is managed by the Office of Economic Development and Opportunity. They have identified these neighborhoods that are lower income, traditionally have received less investment in all kinds of infrastructure, not just sidewalks. And those residents of those neighborhoods are at risk of displacement, which is exacerbated by the current policies. By placing the responsibility for building sidewalks on adjacent property owners, that means a lot of these neighborhoods would never get new sidewalks unless they're actually redeveloped, which would probably lead to a lot of those people being displaced. So within those NEST neighborhoods, the program offers just an automatic 20% discount to every property in those neighborhoods. And again, with that typical case of a single family home on a local street, $2.15 per linear foot discounted by 20% would be a typical fee would be about $86 per year or about $7 per month. So these revenues could only be used for sidewalks. That is baked into the proposal. They could not be repurposed for something else. We at the Denver Streets Partnership, we love things like bike lanes and street trees and bus stop amenities and pedestrian scale lighting. All of that stuff is really important and we hope to see it funded. But this program could only be used for sidewalks, building new sidewalks where they are currently missing, widening sidewalks that are too skinny, they don't currently meet ADA standards, doing sidewalk repairs in perpetuity, so this would not sunset at any point, as well as the cost to administer the program, including staffing and any other ancillary costs. It does not include things, again, like putting in street trees or street furniture, replacing curb and gutter, except as needed in the course of building sidewalks. It also does not cover the cost of snow removal. That is a very important issue and a challenge for our city, but we believe there's different ways that that can be addressed. The program would be managed by the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure with citizen oversight through the DOTI Advisory Board. DOTI would be required to develop a sidewalk master plan to present to the DOTI Advisory Board for approval, and then would have to report annually to the DOTI Advisory Board on what they had accomplished in the previous year and the look ahead to the upcoming year. The program also directs DOTI to use the city's existing plans to prioritize the build out and maintenance of sidewalks, in particular Denver's Vision Zero Action Plan and the Denver Moves Pedestrians and Trails Plan, which establishes tiered priorities for building out and maintaining Denver's sidewalk network, with the top priority being placed on the high injury network. Those are Denver's most dangerous streets where the preponderance of traffic deaths are occurring, followed closely by major transit corridors. Every transit rider is a pedestrian at some point in their trip, and so having good pedestrian access is essential. And then the next tier focuses on connections to high priority destinations for people walking, places like neighborhood schools and parks, grocery stores, healthcare centers, and the like. And I would note there is a very strong overlap between Denver's high injury network and transit corridors and our equity index areas where we have a higher preponderance of low income households. So again, we're really trying to bake equity into this program and leaning on a lot of the amazing planning work that the city has already done in developing plans like the Vision Zero plan and the Denver Moves Pedestrians plan. It does also include provisions for flagstone. We know a lot of people really love Denver's flagstone sidewalks and the way they contribute to the character of our neighborhood. So it does require Dottie to develop strategies for releveling and resetting the flagstone sidewalks where that original flagstone does remain intact, and not just replacing it with concrete. So we would love to have your support as individuals, as individual neighborhood associations, as the INC. You can learn more about the campaign and get involved at our website, denversidewalks.com. We are in the midst right now of collecting signatures to qualify to be on the ballot in November of 2022. So this year, we have already passed the halfway mark in terms of the number of signatures required, but we still have more work to do. So we would love to have volunteer help with that. You can donate to the campaign. You can find locations where you can go and sign the petition yourself. And also we are encouraging people to endorse the campaign as individuals or as organizations. But to actually get on the ballot, we don't need just endorsements. We actually do need signatures. So that is our primary focus right now. And I will stop. I do have some additional background if anything comes up, but I will stop sharing my screen and see if there are any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Jill. I want to just start with 2 questions, and then if we can have people raise their hands. Can you tell us the amount of signatures you need and what your deadline is, just for people to have that awareness?
Sure. We need 9,184 valid signatures from people who are registered to vote in Denver. And July 11th is the deadline for turning those into the Denver Election Division.
Thank you so much. So Eleni, I see you had put 2 questions in the chat before. I'll start with you, and then Nika, then Adrian, Robert, and Rosemary. I'll put who's up next in the chat.
Okay, I can just ask it if that's easier. I was just curious why the discount is not applicable to all residents.
Oh, come on.
Well, I don't believe it would be a discount if it would be applied to all residents. That would just be a lower fee rate. I did fail to mention that in addition to the discount in the Nest neighborhoods, there is a provision where property owners can choose to defer the fee until the point of sale of their house, which can be really helpful. For example, if you're an older adult on a fixed income and your primary asset is your house, you can choose to defer the fee, and then the cost would be rolled into the sale once the house is sold.
So the discount's only 20%, and we were told that it only applies to certain neighborhoods. That's correct. So it doesn't apply to all residents in all neighborhoods, only certain neighborhoods. Is that correct?
Correct. It is all properties within those Nest neighborhoods will automatically receive the discount. We did consider the possibility of doing an income qualified discount, but decided against that. It creates an additional administrative burden and cost for the city, and also requires the individual resident to take the action to apply for that discount. And so in consultation, like I said, with the Department of Economic Development and Opportunity and other partners, we felt this approach that just automatically applied the discount in these priority neighborhoods, combined with the option to defer the fee to the point of sale, was a better approach.
And how will that be communicated to people that they can defer it if they can't afford it? I mean, we're in a housing situation where we're having people losing their houses in foreclosure. You know, we don't want to have a situation where like they don't know. I mean, the city has rolled out, Dottie has rolled out a lot of new policies with respect to trash, and there's just a lot going on for people to try to get educated on. And I just, you know, I have an issue with it not being something that applies to all people. We know that we've had seniors and elders attempting to age in place that are being forced out and displaced. And so I would, you know, it would be nice that would apply. There'd be an income way or a set way that it was more equitable and inclusive of all neighborhoods, depending on people's economic circumstance.
Sure, we would absolutely be working hard to get the word out to people about these options for affordability, and we would look to INC and neighborhood associations to help us do that as well. And again, if the discount applied to every neighborhood, then it would not be a discount. It would just be a lower fee. And we worked really hard to come up with a fee rate that we felt truly was modest and affordable, but would actually generate enough revenue to build out the sidewalk network in a timely manner.
Okay, well, that's okay. It seems like it's another fee that's being added that is not taking into account economic circumstances of many of our neighbors. So that's just I like that we would get better sidewalks, and totally with the outcomes of your initiative seem great, but I'm just concerned on how we're getting there, and that maybe there's a slightly better path forward to allow more inclusivity, equitable, that there'd be that analysis. And I'm not worried about a burden on the city. The city has the money to hire staff to administer that program. To me, and my position, that they would be able to do that. The income qualified people, they've got Denver. They have that technical experience, maybe not at Dottie, but they have it within other agencies of the city. So leveraging that strength of that would make it much fairer, I think, for people in the long term. Dottie's not been very particularly helpful on safe routes to schools, and we found intersections that have not been in city compliance or even state compliance with speed limits and postings, and told that that's not a priority. So I'm always concerned about things being prioritized in a way that may make sense for Dottie, but may not make sense where the neighborhoods that most need sidewalks are not being addressed, and the ones that are economically more vulnerable are not being addressed equitably. So those are just some of the concerns I have.
Thank
Sure,
you.
those are fair concerns. And I would just say if this initiative doesn't pass, then we'll continue with the status quo where 40% of Denver streets have no sidewalks or substandard sidewalks at all. And it's entirely up to the adjacent property owner to cover those costs.
If I can, Jill, it's important, I think, when we talk about costs, to compare the costs that people are exposed to today. As someone posted in the chat, if the city finds that your sidewalk is unsafe and uneven, they can require you to repair it within 30 days. And it's incredibly inefficient to do a small piece of sidewalk, and you may be coming up with thousands of dollars. Or there was someone who posted in the chat, they had a fair amount of frontage, perhaps tens of thousands of dollars to replace sidewalks. So it is important to think about what the current state is that we're dealing with.
Okay, so up next is Nika, and then I'll post the next list of people, but it'll be Adrian and then Robert. Nika Cave, I saw your note. If you want to come.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Ian. Also, hi, Jill. Thank you for doing this meeting today. Just happy to be here in support. And my question was mostly regarding the prioritization of repairs and potentially replacement, specifically for the flagstone sidewalks. I'm just curious how that process would look like in terms of reporting a specific stretch of sidewalk to be repaired, and then what that would kind of look like. Just knowing that we have the 311 system in place, would it be going through that? Would just love to know, as a community member and an advocate, how we can actually sort of mobilize these funds for those specific areas.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, Denver already has established a prioritization for building out the sidewalk network as part of the Denver Moves Pedestrians and Trails Plan that was completed in 2019. And it took all the sidewalks in the city and put them into 6 different priority tiers, with the top tier being the high injury network, where the vast majority of the traffic fatalities are happening, followed by the high frequency transit corridors, followed by those other high priority pedestrian destinations, places like schools and parks. And so the ordinance directs Dottie to use those prioritization tiers as a guide, while also being efficient, right? So with going into a neighborhood, dealing with a neighborhood or corridors in a comprehensive manner, as opposed to doing scattershot work across the entire city. And with this funding source, that complete build out of the network would be completed within 9 years. So even neighborhoods that are lower on that priority list would see improvements in their neighborhood within that time frame. Of course, people could still use 311 or Pocket Gov to report egregiously unsafe sidewalk conditions. And then Dottie could evaluate those and determine if they're so dangerous that they do need to be addressed immediately or could be put in the queue to be addressed when their prioritization tier arrives. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I think that answers it. Thank you. And I guess just kind of to clarify, so if, you know, as a community member, if we wanted to sort of speed up the process, would that be the best way to go through the Pocket Gov or 311 system?
Currently, that is the only way that sidewalk repairs happen in Denver. Denver, for a short period of time, was doing some proactive inspections, put those on hold during COVID and hasn't restarted that. So the only way that sidewalk repairs happen at this point in time is if somebody submits a 311 complaint. The city then sends that out an inspector, and if required, cites the adjacent property owner to complete those repairs.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Jill.
Sure.
All right, Adrian, you're up next.
Yeah, thank you. And Jill, thank you and all of your cohort for doing this work. Much needed, on everybody's radar for a long time, and greatly applauded, at least in this household. My question relates to a similar program which the city instituted some years ago to tax us for our electricity bill so that lines could be undergrounded. Wonderful program, similar to this, but it didn't work because the city has used all of the money that's come into that, to the best of my knowledge, to build new or to underground new lines for example, the airport and so forth. So my question is, does this proposal cover the cost of new sidewalks for new constructions in new development, or will the city be also covering those, and how will they be prioritized?
So I'm not familiar with the electric lines initiative that you described previously, so I can't speak to that. I would say this is set up as a fee and an enterprise fund, which means that the funding is legally restricted and it can only be used for the purposes outlined in the ordinance, which includes new construction of sidewalks where they are currently missing, widening of sidewalks where they are too skinny to meet ADA standards, and ongoing repairs of sidewalks in perpetuity. All of those would be prioritized using the exact same priority tiers that I discussed previously: high injury network, transit, high priority destinations. It does not eliminate the city's ability to require developers to build sidewalks in the course of development. So that still is a tool available to the city, but it does mean that you now no longer have to wait for your neighborhood to be completely redeveloped before you get sidewalks. But everybody in the entire city, all neighborhoods, would get sidewalks within 9 years.
Super.
Okay, up next is Robert.
Okay, caught me while I was writing a note. I have a follow-up to something that was mentioned earlier before I have my question. So I actually have two. First of all, are you proposing deferring the repairs or deferring the cost of those repairs?
So if a property owner chooses to take advantage of the option to defer the fee, that would not impact the sidewalk in front of their house. It would still be built or repaired along with all the other sidewalks, as part of that prioritization scheme. It's literally just a deferral of the fee, not a deferral of the construction or repair of sidewalks.
Okay, thank you. Second one is some similar questions to the waste management program that's working its way through. How would this be billed to the property owner? Is it going to come in on the property tax bill, or is this going to be a separately sent invoice? And if it's a separately set invoice, is it going to be monthly, quarterly, annually?
So we modeled our ordinance pretty closely on the storm water fee. If you're familiar with that, every property in Denver pays a stormwater fee based on the square footage of impervious surface on your property. That goes into, again, a dedicated enterprise fund that pays for our city's stormwater infrastructure. So we basically exactly paralleled the administration of that fee for the sidewalk fee. So they could be included on the exact same bill that is sent to the property owner. You get that stormwater fee twice a year. The sidewalk fee would just be rolled into that exact same bill.
Thank you.
Okay, Rosemary, you're up next.
Thank you. Jill, I want to just give you a huge thank you for taking this on. I live in University Park, and University Park Community Council has advocated for alternative sources of funding since 2005. Mary Myers, whom Joel referred to, was the sidewalk chair at that time, and she put forward a position statement advocating for alternative sources of funding. So we have been able to put in some sidewalks. We've done it via Safe Routes to School. We've done it as part of a public works program where there was like extra money left over, but it requires a lot of wherewithal and a lot of energy from somebody who can navigate the system in different neighborhoods. So I think it's everybody's, we need sidewalks. And I think the way that you have put this together is very equitable. I think the prioritization system makes total sense. I was also the co-chair of the Pedestrian and Trails Denver Right Committee, and that prioritization system was set up at that time, and there was a lot of deliberation that went into this. So I just want to compliment you on how you've done this. I'm bringing this to our current board this coming week, and I anticipate that we will be able to find volunteers to take the petition around. So,
thank you, Rosemary, and thank you for your leadership on the Denver Moves Pedestrians Plan. It really helped lay the foundation for this work that we're doing now.
Alan, you're up next. Alan Gass. Looks like you're trying to unmute.
Sorry, I was muted. Jill, thank you for your work in advancing this initiative. There are numerous instances in the city where utility poles are blocking sidewalks that otherwise are useful. How does your initiative address this issue?
So we were balancing getting very proscriptive in telling Dottie exactly what to do versus establishing clear guidelines for Dottie in implementing this program. And basically the guidelines to Dottie is to make sure every street has a sidewalk that is ADA accessible, and to the extent possible complies with Denver's Complete Streets Design Guidelines for preferred sidewalk widths and characteristics. If there is an instance where there's a pole in the middle of the sidewalk that's blocking it, that prevents it from being ADA accessible, you know, usually the easy fix for that is to just put a little curve in the sidewalk so that you have a 5 foot wide clear path around that pole, and or to move the pole. But we did not want to presume that we knew the right answer in every single one of those cases, you know, wanted to leave some professional judgment up to the Director of Transportation with the guidance that we should have an ADA accessible sidewalk on every street. Does that make sense in response to your question?
Well, it does, except that you see my background is Bobby R. Park, and the intersection of Yale Avenue and Havana Street has 2 ADA accessible sidewalk intersections, and both of them are blocked by utility poles, and there is no space in one case, there is no space to do otherwise than relocate the pole.
Yeah, and I can't speak to that specific situation since I'm not familiar with it. And again, our intention wasn't to come up with a specific solution for every single one of those challenges in Denver, but to give Dottie the directive and the funding to deal with each of those situations in a way that made sense
So the best way to deal with it is 311, probably.
At the moment, that's the only way to deal with it.
Thank you.
Okay, Steve Harley, you're up next.
Hi, folks. I have a kind of unusual situation that is perhaps illustrative of some issues that I think we ought to consider. First of all, I support the general idea and I'll benefit from it because I have sidewalk repairs that are needed. But first of all, I'm on a corner. One side of my property is a collector street, and the other side is the shorter side is local. And yet the side that gets the most pedestrian use is the local street. And so charging more for collector streets seems like it doesn't always work out as the best benefit. Secondly, I think that the people who use the sidewalks are the ones who get the benefit, not the property owner per se. And so it turns out I'll be charged a considerable amount, even though I don't have a special, there's not a tremendous amount of pedestrian use here because it's not a Broadway sidewalk. But I will benefit because I'll be able to amortize the costs that I would otherwise be forced to do, because right now the city is requiring someone who does even a tiny addition on their home to repair all their sidewalks. And that's putting me into a position where that charge is going to be assessed at some point in the near future. So one of my questions is, where is the cutoff for this? I haven't been assessed for that, but it has been required due to the plans for construction on my property. And at some point towards the completion of the project, I expect the city to say, you must repair your sidewalk. I'm wondering if if this passes, when will it take effect, and how will it work for my situation?
Yeah, so there is no provision to retroactively reimburse property owners who have made, built sidewalks or repaired sidewalks adjacent to their property, given that that's how we've built and repaired sidewalks for decades. There's no clear way that we could do that in a manageable way. But going forward, once the initiative passes, that would change it. So it would no longer be the responsibility of the adjacent property owner to make those repairs. That responsibility would fall to the city after the initiative passes. So
When would it-
basically after the election.
Yeah, so it would take effect immediately after the election. So if I can push the city off from assessing me to that long, I come out about $10,000 ahead, at least in the short term.
Yeah, so you might want to drag your feet on your construction project.
Well, yes and no. There's other factors there. But how about the fact that you're using the collectors' streets at assessing them a higher fee when they're not always really a higher service? And how about the fact that it's the public that gets the benefit of the sidewalks, not the property owner so much? And you're assessing the property owners for a public benefit. Have you really considered that? Did you look at any other alternatives?
We did consider a wide array of varieties of ways of potentially funding the sidewalk network. And you're correct, the street typology is not 100% perfect in every single case. We would have to have 1,000 different street typologies for that to be true. But again, it does consider not just whether it's a local collector or arterial street, but also the adjacent land use. So if it's a residential collector street, the fee would be lower than if it's a mixed use or commercial collector street, where you would expect more pedestrian traffic. No street typology system is going to be 100% perfect all the time, but we feel like the Blueprint Denver street typology was pretty good, and that there was a lot of good thinking and analysis that went into establishing those street types. And you're absolutely correct. The benefits of sidewalks go well beyond the adjacent private property owner. I mean, who wants to just pace back and forth on a patch of concrete in front of their house? The purpose of the sidewalk network is to help you get from A to B, which means traveling in front of other people's properties too. And so we all benefit from having good sidewalks, even if the funding isn't used immediately to build or repair a sidewalk in front of our home. And again, we modeled this very closely on the stormwater fee. You could say the exact same thing about the stormwater fee. We all benefit from having good stormwater management that prevents our sidewalks or our properties from flooding. But the fee is pegged to our individual properties, and that's how we fund that infrastructure citywide.
I would take issue with that because the stormwater fee has to do with impermeable surface, and you have control over how much impermeable surface, or at least an incentive not to make more impermeable surface, which is a benefit to the property owner. I don't know. There's an incentive built into that that's not built into the sidewalk program.
Sure, and our fee again was pegged to anticipated pedestrian demand based on the street type that the property is on and how many people might potentially be walking. So we did try to make that nexus between the fee and the purpose it was serving.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. So I've just been going back and forth here. We just want to honor Councilman Flynn's time. So we're going to take a pause on questions for Jill. We do have the list of speakers still in line here, but Councilman Flynn, we wanted to give you your opportunity to make your presentation. You should have the ability to do co-host. And we want to honor people's time and not keeping them too long. We thought we were going to have a shorter meeting today.
Thank you. I was actually going to wait till the questions were over, but thank you. So I'll hang around. And I just want to be clear how I ended up here, Ian. If it's okay to tell folks, you and I we met for coffee on Tuesday to talk about a host of things, and you asked me about this. I didn't bring this up. You asked me, and I gave you some thoughts, and you asked me, would I like to come here and share them? So I just want to be clear that that's why I'm here. I'm not on a campaign or anything, but I have been looking at the impact that this would have on, first I started in my district, and then I started going around other council districts to see what the fees would be. And I do have a concern that there's a clash of values here. And one value is sidewalks for everyone, accessible sidewalks, adequate sidewalks. When I walked this district campaigning, in Brentwood and even in Harvey Park, those mountable curbs and sidewalks, they're only 2 feet wide. I couldn't even walk side by side with my wife when we were walking. So I understand that is an incredible need, but I also see this as a potential displacement accelerator because the fees are in some cases pretty sizable in some of our very vulnerable neighborhoods that are not nest neighborhoods. I don't have a nest neighborhood in my district, but I do have some very vulnerable neighborhoods, particularly Marley, Brentwood, and Harvey Park, Sharon Park, and those areas north of Yale, especially. And so I asked Ian if I could share my screen. I hope I do this correctly. There it is. So I went through mostly my district. So I started here with with Bear Valley, and it took a couple. And these are some of the annual fees that would be assessed. So this is a fellow here. He's actually in Bear Valley, but he's on Sheridan, which is an arterial, and that's charged $3.58 a linear foot. He then is on Bates, and then around on his backside, he has Ames, I believe it is. So he actually has 3 exposures to public rights of way. And his annual fee would be $893.60. Then I started going down some of the other homes. This one here, this is the lowest that I selected to evaluate, and I selected that because that's my house. I live in a cul-de-sac. I only have about what does that divide by 250? And I have about 35, 36 feet of frontage. I can't even park my car in front of my house because it's on the curve. But you can see the impact is disparate. Let me find the one, where is it? Northeast Park Hill. This is on Martin Luther King. This is a house that's on the northeast corner of Martin Luther King and Monaco Street Parkway. It also has exposures on 3 sides, and their annual fee would be $1,100 per year. This one in Barnum is a rental unit. It's on Alameda at Perry, and on its other side is Byers Place. And this is a rental unit, and the annual fee is $938. Now that would be, I believe, is Barnum in a Nest neighborhood? I'm not sure if it is. If that is one of the Nest neighborhoods, then there'd be a 20% discount on that. Seven Springs. This one here in Pinehurst. This guy on Ames has 3 exposures. By comparison, I have an auto dealership just north of me, and their annual fee, Champ Nissan, their annual fee would be $793. That's a car dealership, and that's what they would have to pay compared to some of my neighbors. And so I just have a real concern that that this will accelerate the rate of displacement. And right now, for me, that's a value that I hold a little bit higher than trying to complete sidewalks within 9 years. The other concern I expressed to Ian was the 9-year time frame. I don't believe is practical. I don't believe there are enough contractors in Denver or who are accessible to Denver. I don't believe the capacity exists in the industry to build out everything that's in this program in 9 years. I understand it's a bonding program. Jill, was it about $850 million in revenue bonds I thought you could leverage? But I don't believe that that amount of money could be put out on the streets in 9 years and be finished. Some of these streets, like in Brentwood, with the Hollywood curbs that are 2 feet in just 2 feet, and then the drainage pan, you would have to either acquire more right-of-way into the person's yard, or you would have to regrade the street profile and cross-section in order to widen that sidewalk to a standard. I would love to do that in 9 years. I don't believe it can be done. And I believe if we try to do it this way, a lot of those people who would benefit from those sidewalks would not be able to live there anymore because they would be priced out of the neighborhood through the taxes. There was, I believe that was most of the concerns that I expressed to Ian. So with that, thank you, Ian, for inviting me. I'll hang around and listen.
Thank you, Councilman Flynn. I appreciate that. I see there's a few more people. We're going to go back to the questions. If you have a question directly for the councilman, please feel free just to direct it to him. If not, I'll assume that it's for Jill and the proponents to answer. Bruce, I believe you were next.
Yeah, Jill, I'd like to have you answer Kevin's comments, but also talk about what the city attorney and the city auditor have to say about this measure.
So I will start with the issue that Kevin raised, Councilman Flynn raised, of if it's feasible to build out the sidewalk network within 9 years, and do we have enough capacity within the construction community to do that? This is a concern that other people have raised, and I think it's based out of our current sidewalk program, where the city is spending $2 to $3 million per year on sidewalks, which attracts a certain type of contractor to do that work. We've been talking a lot with people in the industry who do major infrastructure projects, and when you have an $850 million project that companies could be participating in, you attract a different scale of contractor who can do a much larger scale enterprise level of work. For example, with that level of funding, a contractor may decide it's worth their while to actually establish a concrete plant here in Denver to provide the concrete needed to build out those sidewalks in a timely manner. We acknowledge this is an ambitious program, trying to build out the sidewalks within 9 years rather than 400 years. But the city and the state and other agencies have certainly taken on major infrastructure programs in the past and been able to carry them out. So we are optimistic that with an enterprise scale program, that is in fact possible. I can't speak directly to the specific examples that Councilman Flynn offered in terms of the properties and what the potential fee would be. I'm not familiar with those properties. I did not see the math behind those numbers. But like I said, we did do analysis of what the fee would be for more typical properties within Denver, and found that about $100 per month is the more typical fee. And there are mechanisms built into the program, like we mentioned, of being able to defer the fee if that really is a burden to the property owner. And just a reminder again, that if this does not pass, what the property owners in those instances who have very large frontages are responsible for is the full cost of building or repairing sidewalks adjacent to their properties. And so those could be, $10,000 or more for the cost. And so the question is, what would people prefer to pay? A smaller fee or be on the hook for that very large cost? And then I think your other question, Bruce, was about the city attorney. Oftentimes liability is raised as a concern or a reason why the city can't be more proactive about sidewalks, that they might get sued and that this would create an even bigger financial burden for the city. But there was a state Supreme Court ruling recently that was very much in the favor of a program like this. So in the city of Boulder was sued. It was a pretty clear-cut case where the sidewalk was in obvious disrepair, presented an obvious hazard. Somebody tripped and fell, injured themselves, was able to demonstrate that the city knew the sidewalk was in disrepair and had failed to act in a timely manner. This state Supreme Court ruled in the favor of the city of Boulder because it recognized that sidewalk repair problems are so widespread currently that it's just totally unrealistic to expect the city to be able to fix every single sidewalk immediately overnight. And so gave the city basically the grace to be able to deal with the sidewalks with the resources and the program that they have. The intention of the Denver Deserves Sidewalks program is that it would provide a sustained dedicated funding source that would allow the build out of a complete safe sidewalk network within 9 years, and then to maintain it in good repair going forward, so that you would not have these safety hazards and you would actually reduce the liability of the city to being sued for something like that. So we feel like liability concerns, especially with the state Supreme Court ruling recently, are really not a reason why a program like this could move forward.
Okay, up next is Michael Henry. And then after Michael Henry, Kevin, if you want to come back on to talk about your other thing you wrote in the chat, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you, Ewan. I would like to commend Jill and the Streets Partnership for all the work they put into this. I remember, and Joel mentioned this briefly, probably 10 years ago, when I was chairing the INC Zoning and Planning Committee, we spent a lot of energy thinking about and supporting the whole idea of improving sidewalks in the city. And I would encourage INC to think about being more proactive about things that matter to us and matter to neighborhoods. It seems like we spend so much energy complaining about things and not being positive and thinking about what do we want and how can we help make things happen. About the last time that we really had a positive impact that I can remember is probably around 2007 or 8. We sent down a large group to city council and persuaded them to amend the city budget to add a significant number of police officers. to the budget at a time when crime was running rampant in the city. At any rate, I strongly support the ballot issue. And in 2 weeks, I believe that the INC delegation will vote on whether it should lend its INC support to this. So I hope that all of you who are delegates will take part in that discussion.
Thanks, Michael. Go ahead, Councilman Flynn.
Thanks, Ian. The other matter that I wanted to bring up, and Jill and I we exchanged email on this about a month or so ago. But the sidewalks in most of my subdivision are the unitary curb gutter sidewalk. They're a single slab. And if that were to be replaced, and I know this because I've helped some constituents get their sidewalks replaced down here, the wastewater fee, the wastewater fund would pay for that because it's a drainage facility. The sidewalk is not separate from the curb or gutter. It's a single poured slab. And so I wondered about the legality of charging those property owners a fee for a sidewalk that they will never get, even if it needed to be replaced. My sidewalk's 42 years old and it's in perfect shape. The other thing I wanted to mention, Jill, I worked out the fee on your property, and your annual fee would be $162 because you're on a corner. Your neighbors who are next to you on the row houses there that are not on a corner property, their fee would be $40 a year. So there's quite a difference when you talk about the level of the fee from neighborhood to neighborhood. In suburban context zoning, our frontages tend to be more than 18.5 feet, like row houses, or they tend to be, because our primary residences are oriented in parallel to the street, so they're wider. And there's a lot of rental units, Harvey Park, Marley, Brentwood. And I'm just very concerned with the trash fee that's going to be considered, adding to the cost of living here. Excel's tiered rates for electricity kicking in soon with their smart meters. How many families with children are really going to be able to shift doing laundry until after 7 p.m. when the rates per kilowatt hour go down and Excel wants us to do all our stuff in the evening? We're just making it more and more expensive for people to live here. And with the inflation that's going on, I just think this is a bad time to be asking people to pay $500, $600, up to $1,000 more a year for sidewalks they may never see in their lifetime.
Okay, thanks,
Just to
Councilman.
respond real quick to the issue of the rollover curbs, you may have an unusual rollover curb in front of your home. Typically, the existing rollover curbs do not meet ADA standards. They are not wide enough to meet ADA standards. So this program would pay for the widening of those rollover curbs. And once they're widened, they are actually considered a sidewalk, not part of the stormwater system. And so the stormwater system would not pay for the repairs of those widened sidewalks over time. The sidewalk program would.
Okay, I don't know that I agree with that. My sidewalk is 5 feet wide and it's a unitary slab. It can't be, I can't replace my sidewalk without also taking out the curb and gutter. And that would be a wastewater responsibility. But I do understand what you're talking about in Brentwood, particularly where you call it a rollover curb. It actually functions as a sidewalk. And some of them are only 2 or 3 feet in width, and that's inadequate, and they should be replaced. I just compare that with the value of trying to keep people in their homes at a time like this. These are lower income neighborhoods, many rentals, and that's uppermost in my mind right now with all the other costs that are going up. I'm not putting down at all the value of trying to provide sidewalks everywhere. I'm trying to find a balance at a time like this that's extraordinarily expensive to live in this city. Thanks.
Those are all good points. And I think this is exactly why we're taking it to the voter. You know, people at INC and across the city have been talking about the need for better sidewalks for years. And the answer has repeatedly been, I don't think right now is the right time. So we're going to ask the voters if they think right now is the right time.
Okay, up next is Jamie Lewis.
Well, good morning, everybody. First of all, I want to thank you for all coming out on a Saturday on a long weekend. It really means you care about your neighborhood. So thank you for participating. I am the transit advisor for the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition, and I also work with Denver Streets Partnership. You can't see it, but I'm in a wheelchair. So obviously good sidewalks for our community is paramount. It really provides an opportunity for us to be as independent as possible. But many of you probably don't know, I was the mayor of Salida, Colorado. So like Councilman Flynn, I've been an elected official, and I appreciate his due diligence in looking into the situation. One of the things that when people talk about fees or taxes, we have to respond with efficiency and value. And one of the things I wanted to point out is that the current system, what Dottie's doing is this checkerboard system of repairing sidewalks and putting the onus on the property owners is just not efficient. What I'm looking forward to with this proposal is that the city of Denver will be able to do blocks at a time. One of the things we were looking forward to is when these fees are collected, that the city will be able to go out and do a bond. I know a lot of people visualize Dottie doing all this work, but in reality, they'll probably be contracting a lot of this work out. So efficiency means doing a block at a time. Somebody had mentioned priorities before. And like I said, doing one block at a time, listening to 311 calls and knocking on somebody's door in the middle of the week, say, by the way, we had a complaint that your sidewalk is not compatible and now you're going to owe, a contractor $2,000 or $3,000. Those are the things we're trying to avoid. And as far as the bad timing, I'm old enough to know I've been through 4 recessions. And the only way we ever get out of these recessions is by investing in our community. So I wanted to thank Jill, and I want to thank Joel for bringing this up, and also thank Councilman Flynn for bringing up his points. But if you think of the big picture, efficiency and value, I think this is a great ballot issue. Thank you.
Okay, up next is Sean. Okay, well, we'll go on to Jerry. Looks like Jerry left. Amanda Roberts.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for being here to talk about sidewalks and all of these amazing, numerous questions we all have about how we get it done in Denver. First, I want to say that I've been involved with this campaign for months. I'm super proud to be a part of it. I feel like we're on the path to getting sidewalks in Denver with this. Hopefully the voters will vote for it and we'll be done, we'll get sidewalks. I feel like I want to bring the conversation back down away from the details and the how-to to like why we're here. So I'm going to tell you why I support this initiative. Really, and it's the only one. There's nobody on council doing it. It's voters doing it. So I support it because I believe in freedom, specifically mobility freedom. If sidewalks are funded and made ADA compliant all over Denver, and they're not, we know they're not. Personally, my daughter could walk to school and back home on her own. I mean, she's in middle school now, she deserves that. In the past year, someone was killed in a crash on her path to school in an area where the sidewalk is about a foot wide. So I live at a curb and gutter neighborhood in Denver. So yeah. And it's absurdly narrow to the point of being completely unusable. Like she has to walk on the people's lawns. So the right of way area is already, there's a path being cut there already. So really kids deserve a basic necessity such as a wider sidewalk to get places. And this really shouldn't be controversial. We shouldn't be fighting about it. It really is on us adults to make this happen for children, also for people in wheelchair users. I mean, people who are blind, who have to navigate our neighborhoods, people who can't live in neighborhoods because they don't have sidewalks because they have some sort of disability that prevents them from living there. So to me, sidewalks are not just public infrastructure, they're social infrastructure. They mean happiness. That means connectivity, that means cohesion, neighborhood cohesion, city cohesion, harmony. I grew up in a city with sidewalks. It's like, I just don't even understand why somebody would, like, why this is even a fight. So I also, with my own eyes, have observed, because I live right next to Glendale, people are out walking all the time. Glendale figured it out. They have sidewalks. And people are out all the time walking in Infinity Park. They're walking to the post office. They're walking all over the grocery. They're walking all over the place. Like, that's normal. And that's all of Denver should have access to that same thing. So, and I have to also say that people in wheelchairs should have access to that same thing. So, and I want to like bring it back down to sidewalks really aren't, in the grand scheme of things, they're not rocket science. Denver can take a look at what other counties and cities have done. And that's what this ballot initiative actually did. It looked at other cities. We're not reinventing the wheel, it's already out there. And compared to massive highway projects that destroy neighborhoods, we have lots of those, convention centers, airports, stadiums, and other urban development that requires concrete pouring. Sidewalks, by comparison, are really easy. And just think about it. People can start ditching cars, which are expensive. And if we're talking about housing versus sidewalks, I think that's a terrible comparison. If you can walk to the grocery store, walk your kid to school, and walk to work, walk to the bus to work, you don't have to own a car. And then so your basic monthly expenses are cheaper and you can afford a home. All right, thanks. That's my spiel.
Okay, Jane, I had seen you put something in the chat, so I just wanted to give you a chance to say it out loud.
Oh, hi, good morning, Ian. Thank you, everyone. I just wonder how city agencies work or don't work together. I live near Downing and Iliff, and they've been trying to put in some new traffic lights there. It's a bus stop corner. The posts and the lights have been hanging over the intersection since January 2021. I've taken pictures. And now there's 2 poles on each corner. It's just impossible to walk through there, you know, when you're very capable. And I can't imagine anybody else trying to get through there with a wheelchair or a cane or anything. And I brought this to the city's attention. I did the 311 thing. I've talked to my councilman Cashman. And it just sort of seems like everybody's like, well, we have to wait for them and we haven't been able to get that done. And then it's somebody else's fault. And, you know, I mean, I just wish the agencies could work together. And so that when a project is started, the whole part of the project gets done within a timely manner instead of just doing it piecework. And I know this isn't quite relevant, but they've just resurfaced with asphalt a bunch of streets around here. And the next week you see the spray cans out there, places where they're going to be cutting up that brand new street. So it just bothers me that agencies can't work together to make some of these things happen. Jill, I thank you for all your work on all of this. I think it's a great idea. I am really concerned about higher taxes for individuals who are just scraping it together right now. And that's a big issue for a lot of neighborhoods. And I don't know if Inc. always represents all of that. Thank you all very much.
Okay, Loretta, you're up next.
All right, hi. Let me take off my earbuds. It seems they're having some issues today. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I had a couple of things. I want to thank Amanda for her comments. I think, you know, she kind of covered some of the gamut. I think, you know, we do want to talk about all the people in the city, and we want to talk about people who, especially, you know, children who don't have sidewalks. I mean, that's a concern. You know, thanks for bringing up those of you who brought up the issues with people with disabilities, I think elderly, people who've had injuries. You know, if you're on crutches, I've been on crutches and tried to walk on a 2-foot wide sidewalk, and it's virtually impossible. So I think that's really hard. So what I end up doing is walking in the street. Is that safe? I don't think so. We're trying to do, vision zero. And I think having vision zero, we should be able to not have people walking in the street, right? We should have some place to have them be able to walk. And I think I really appreciate those who worked on this, because I think part of that is you've tried to come up with something, because clearly City Council has done nothing over the course of the time that I've lived in Denver. And that's more than 20 years. And I feel that's really unfortunate. I think one of the questions I had for Councilperson Flynn, when people have to pay, they have to pay if they do any projects, like my partner said, now, as in years ago, you didn't have to replace your entire sidewalk. If you do something not even near the sidewalk, they're requiring you to replace the sidewalk. So now everyone has to replace their sidewalks. The burden to do that individually and to find a contractor to do one little tiny project, maybe you have 50 feet, maybe you have, 200 feet. The burden to do that is so much more substantially expensive. And when you talk about displacing people, I'd like to know, Councilperson Flynn, have you looked over the past 20 years, how many people have been displaced because they were required to replace a sidewalk? They couldn't afford to do that. I think that's a bigger burden than having someone pay this. I know I talk to a lot of people, and I have friends who are older, friends who are younger, a lot of people who are young who do not have children. They say, why do I have to have the burden to pay for schools? I support schools. I support education. I agree we should pay for schools. We should fund as much as we can, but we're paying for that. We should also pay that children can get to schools and other people can use those sidewalks. And how do you propose to do it? I haven't heard any city council person give us a proposal that says, this is how we're going to do it today. I just want to make sure that we do something and we move forward with this, because what else is being done? It's like, talk is cheap, right? But it's not making anything move. And I think we have to talk about that. It's like, even while you've been in council, Councilperson Flynn, how many people have been displaced? I mean, it's typically not in your council district, probably in the inverted L. And those neighborhoods do not have a lot of sidewalks. So, answer that for me. That would be great. Thank you.
The inverted L does come into my district. I don't know the number. I don't know that we could even capture the number of people who've been affected by the city's new requirement over the last, as you said, the last 20 years to replace sidewalks if they do additions to their house. I know that it is extremely small in comparison to the total number of properties in the city, most of which will never do additions, but all of whom will have to pay some pretty sizable amounts from year to year. And when the folks are elderly and on fixed income, and that's a tough nut to come up with. $600 to $1,000 a year in some of those cases of corner lots and some of the wider sidewalks, and people who have exposure on 3 frontages, who may be elderly, who may be on fixed income. So that hits everybody every year, as opposed to very few people relatively who are adding to their homes and have to replace sidewalks if necessary. It's a clash of values, Loretta. I understand. It's just at this time, with the cost of living in this city, I think it's a bad time to be adding $300 to $1,000 a year to people's household budgets.
Well, I want to respond to that, because I'd like to hear from the presenter who said that those people could apply for a discount. And so, or they could defer that. So I'd like to hear from that, from Jill.
Yes, anybody, and it's not even income qualified, could choose to take advantage of the option to defer the payment until the point of sale. That is an option that would be available to anybody under the program.
Okay, John, you're up next.
Thanks. I think Loretta actually addressed a lot of the points I wanted to make much more passionately than I could, but thank you, Jill, for being here. And I just want to say, I try to replace a lot of car trips with walking trips, and I routinely end up walking in roads like 13th, where it's just not safe to be in that space. So I really support this. And I just wanted to clarify, I think it was answered in chat, but for duplexes, it would be half the cost of the sidewalk space per household. Is that correct?
Yes, it's the linear frontage of your lot. So in the case of row homes or duplexes, the lot, you know, is associated with their portion of that frontage. And I think somebody made a comment in the chat too. If it's multifamily, it's not like every single condo is charged the full cost. It's split across those apartments or condos if it's a multifamily structure.
All right. Thank you very much. Again, this sounds way better than what we currently have. So I appreciate it.
Okay, Gertie, you're up.
I just wanted to support the initiative. I think it's long overdue. And I think Amanda and Loretta brought up very valuable points. I have lived in Denver all my life, and I do a lot of walking. And I noticed that back in the, I believe, 1960s, when the city had a FACE program and subsidized the cost of home improvements in some of the lower income neighborhoods, of which mine was one at that point. And it's just interesting to me to see the difference in the quality of sidewalks that were laid back there in the 1960s. There's was a wonderful contractor named John Sandoval, whose sidewalks are still all intact in my 12-block walk that I do every day. And I think it's wonderful when craftspeople have enough pride in their work to stamp their names and the dates that they did the work in the sidewalk. The ones in our neighborhood that are crumbling and are in really bad shape because a low grade or a low level mix of whatever it that goes into the concrete was used. There is no name stamped into that sidewalk. And I just hope the city will require that the work that's done is quality as opposed to let's cut corners and get as much as we can done. Thank you very much to everybody for being here on Memorial Day weekend and for the work that Jill and her group have done. Thank you.
Okay, well, I believe that wraps up everybody who had placed questions in the chat or raised their hands. Want to thank everybody for being here today on your holiday weekend. As you heard, there is something moving through INC. INC will be taking a vote next month about whether or not to, I believe, endorse this initiative. So, you know, if you are a delegate, please go and remind your RNO. If you're not a delegate, but you belong to your RNO and you advocate or you're against it, it's your choice to go there and to advocate there. If I see some names I haven't seen here before or met in an RNO, if you're not part of an RNO, don't go to it. I highly recommend it. I've been joining INC since I was 22 years old, and it is fantastic education to know what's going on and to meet and work with your neighbors. Jill, I see you dropped that in the link for people who want to participate. Councilman Flynn, could you put your email in if anybody has follow-up questions for you so that they can reach you? And Christine, I see you have your hand up.
I just wanted to thank everyone and welcome some people who aren't on the ZAP list, the zoning and planning list. So you don't usually get our mailings. So we'd like to get you on our list. And you may have received a general email that we sent. So if you just email zoningplanning@denvergov.org, you can get on our list, but we need permission to put you on it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I will just close by saying we're apologize that the other action item or other item for presentation didn't happen today. We were working back and forth with the city. We're trying to get community and planning development to come to INC ZAP to have a conversation with us about how zoning and planning are impacting our climate goals and our targets. I believe we'll also be having a presentation about bills at the State House or state General Assembly, not just the House, that passed and were signed by the governor. He still has a few more days. Just to give you an update about what happened and if it impacts any of the work around housing zoning here in the city and county of Denver.
So Eleni is asking if Councilman Flynn can give us his spreadsheet, and I don't know if he wants to share addresses, but she's still on the call.
If folks want to email me, I can share the research I had. Sure.
Okay, well, I hope everyone has a wonderful extra day of the weekend if you have it off. If not, and you're working, thanks for working over a holiday, and we'll see you all at the next INC meeting.
Bye all.